Well, since it's 9:06 and today is a work day and we appreciate people being on the phone, so on the Zoom, excuse me, so early, I'm going to get us started and other folks will join in, though we have a great crowd, close to 50 folks already on the Zoom with us. So this is a very unique time at WIN. And let me first, just for anybody this is your first interaction with WIN, Women in Need is the largest shelter transitional housing provider for homeless families with children in the 5 boroughs. We're also the largest provider of permanent supportive housing for homeless families with children in New York State, perhaps in the country. One of the things that's unique about WIN as compared to some of the other shelter providers out there is that we believe the money we get from the city, our contract, which basically pays for rent, heat, hot water, et cetera, the basics, that's the floor of what we do. The ceiling, that's the needs of our clients. And that's why our staff has developed a holistic wraparound model called the Way to Win, which provides additional services that we know are critical to help families succeed and never return to shelter. So for example, we have an income building program, a job training, job placement program. If you don't leave shelter with a good job, non-minimum wage job, you're going to return to shelter. But the last study we did of folks who had left shelter a year before, it showed that 91% of people in that study that we had placed had not returned to shelter. So for example, we're very proud of that income building program. We're also very proud of one of our Way to Win other programs for our children, our Camp Win, which is a STEAM-based program, not just in the summer, but every day that school is not in session, so our moms can keep working or going to the many, many appointments they have to go to. Now, we had a total, crush during the pandemic, which our staff rose to the occasion on. And then a few months ago, the governor of Texas makes a decision, I'm not going to wax poetically political on that, though I could, makes a decision which results in thousands of families and individuals being sent unceremoniously from Texas to New York. We have absorbed in our shelters 274 refugee asylum-seeking families. Within those families, there are 700 children. So our work with them is similar, but also very different. When you say he had the shirt on his back, that is all these individuals have. And in many cases, it's the shorts and the flip-flops are all they've had. So our staff has had to mobilize, and most of these clients do not speak English. They've had to mobilize to provide more translation services, to get donations of clothing, particularly winter clothing. We still need new coats, adult children, boots, adult children new, and also to work on making sure they were getting all the food that they needed. Every shelter has a pantry at WIN, but that's different than 3 meals a day, snacks every day. And for many of these folks, we're not sure when they're going to get asylum status, U visas, temporary protective status, and the other governmental programs or identities, if you will, that they qualify for. So I'm gonna just say that this has provided new challenges, as I said, and new expenses that the city, and I understand, has said they may or may not be able to reimburse us. For example, for the 5 refrigerators we had to buy so we can house the chicken and the meat that we've had to buy so that asylum-seeking families can have protein. We need all of your support as we move forward, but I mostly want to express my gratitude to the staff who've done just so much. And I want to throw it over now to members of our staff who can give you the real frontline experience. I'm just the talking head, you all know that. And you're going to hear now from Dr. Henry Love, who is our Vice President of Policy and Planning, and Chris Mann, our Director of Policy and Planning. They are both working not necessarily on the food or the clothes or the food, those kind of issues, but working on the policy issues. We need change to help these families right away, because the second they get off that bus, they're New Yorkers, and what Henry and Chris do is advocate for New Yorkers. We're going to hear from Diana Santos, our Chief Program Officer. She oversees all of our client interventions and social services. She's had vast experience working with homeless individuals, and she's leading the frontline efforts for these families. And we're also going to hear from Tamara Ortiz, AKA Miss Tammy. Why is she Miss Tammy? She oversees all of our programs in the shelters, our children's program, so hence the Miss Tammy, as well as income building and a number of other programs. And she's going to speak to us again from a frontline perspective, but with a particular vision on the trauma that all of this has been for the children who have already faced great trauma. And just in closing, I think I've said just in closing like 10 times, I want to thank Claudia and Sean and the members of the development team who've pulled this webinar together. We'll have some questions and answers at the end, and mostly thank all of you for joining at a very, very busy time, and wish you all a happy holidays.
So with that, and thank you, Chris, I'll take over and just provide a little bit of context for this whole crisis and sort of how we got into this situation. So just like Chris said, a few months ago, August 5th to be exact, the first bus of asylum-seeking folks, or what I've been calling our Texas cohort of migrant families, were being bused by the governor of Texas, more or less into sort of a political ploy in conjunction with some other folks across the country. And I think one of the misconceptions about this crisis has been that it was just because of that one act. But one of the things that we've really have been trying to advocate for in this conversation and about this narrative is that it's not just single men that are coming from Venezuela. It's much more nuanced and complex than that. And it goes into a larger trend that we're seeing globally in terms of migrant flows. So migrant flows of folks throughout South America, Central America, the Northern Triangle, fleeing a lot of the instability and violence in those countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and also Colombia and Venezuela to some degree. We also see some issues happening in Haiti, and we've had a few folks that are coming from Central and West Africa as well. And these trends really ratcheted up the summer of 2022 when these families were sort of being used as political ploys. But again, this migrant flow process has been one that's been happening for many years now. And it's been sort of a trickling into our homelessness response system because New York City is a right to shelter place. And to be quite honest, New York has always been a place for migrants and immigrants. And so there's always been that desire to come here for centuries. And so what we're seeing though now is really the concentrated, that political sort of busing of folks that really destabilize the system and bringing them into the city. And so the majority of those families, have fled thousands of miles. Most of them are coming from Honduras, Venezuela, Colombia, and they've just been through tremendous traumatic experiences. We had one family that, she shaved the head of their daughter because they were afraid that in that journey that she might be likely to be sex trafficked. Because it's such a dangerous and perilous journey on the way from South America all the way through the Northern Triangle, through Mexico, and then to the border, where they were then, many of them detained in that cohort. And so over the last few months, and this is just with this influx, the city of New York is seeing about 22,000 migrants arrive in the city. And we really think that's an undercount because those are the 22,000 that are coming through Port Authority. And what we have learned in our advocacy work is that, yes, that is part of this population, but also people are coming from a host of other mechanisms. So they're coming into our airports, right? JFK, LaGuardia, Newark. They're coming into a host of other bus terminals throughout the city, not just Port Authority. And so again, that 22,000 we think is an undercount, and it's probably much higher in our city and how we're responding. And we're still seeing that trickling in amongst our new clients that are coming in, even as that busing sort of has tapered down. And so through our advocacy work, we really believe that these numbers, like I said, are an undercount. And we've been working with other partner organizations, other advocacy groups to really get to the bottom of what's at stake and what's the biggest issues for folks. And so, when we talk about what are those causes, those root causes of why people are fleeing, again, state-sponsored political turmoil, gang-related violence, racial ethnic marginalization, particularly amongst indigenous and Afro-descendant groups such as the Garifuna in Honduras and parts of Panama, economic inequity, lack of opportunities, extreme poverty, deprivation, and then the devastation of COVID. And then I think another piece of this that hasn't been really talked about is also the role of natural disasters that have been impacted by climate change, that have made these situations in folks' homes very precarious. And so how are they getting here? They're typically following established routes, again, through South America, Central America, into Mexico. And these are people coming from all over the world that are coming through this. So people coming from West Africa, Central Africa, the Caribbean, et cetera, are also still coming through that Mexico sort of pathway and entering through Mexico into the US. And again, these routes are extremely dangerous, they're rugged. People know that these folks are incredibly vulnerable. So people, gangs, human traffickers, et cetera, are really preying on this population. And for those that are able to make it to the US, the ordeal is far from over. And so what we've really been up against is really helping folks navigate the complex legal aspects and the legal limbo that many of them are in because of their immigration status, and the lack of legal services in particular to help folks navigate our really complex and broken immigration system. And so migrant families, that when we had, like Chris said, about 270 odd families that are part of this main cohort. And again, as we've seen, we're still seeing these trickling in, and it's far from over. And although the crisis may not be on the news, we're still seeing these flows and we're still seeing these needs. And with that, I want to turn it over to Diana Santos, our Chief Program Officer, who can speak a little bit more to how we as an organization have really responded in real time to the needs of these families.
Good morning. As mentioned by Henry, in August, I received a call from our program directors that we had about 170 families that had come in, and they had come in with nothing but the clothing on their backs. And our program directors were running around trying to find enough food, enough clothing for the families, shoes and t-shirts, and it was still warm, but pants for the children and anything that they could find in order to supply them with new clothing or at least something for the day, because they had come in with clothing that they had worn for days. To say that they caught us off guard was, it's minimal. Our families don't come in with nothing. They come in with some stuff, and we're able to complement whatever they have and assist with whatever they have. As mentioned before, we supply pantry, we supply assistance, but never to this extent, because the system is not set up for us to be able to help families in this way. Needless to say, we at WIN right away ran to form a committee of different departments where we decided where we were going to start to ask for help. And we did so right away. We were able to guide us and able to ask Trinity Church and different other organizations to assist us, not only with food, but with clothing and day-to-day shampoo, toothbrushes, every single thing you can imagine. Starting new and starting fresh, we realized that the culture shock was one of the biggest things that was happening with the families. And so we developed an orientation in order to welcome the families, but also to assist them in the transition of coming to New York, what it looks like and what it looks like in shelter. What are the different positions? What are the different supports, the language barriers, and how we can assist in doing so. And so we created orientations with the help of our WIN Academy and trauma-informed care, and we were able to hit the ground, myself and Ms. Tammy, and really meet the families and do orientation in all of the buildings. And what an honor to have met so many families and hear so many stories. We timed our orientations to 45 minutes to an hour to explain what a case manager was, to explain what the local stores were. And needless to say that they took about 2.5 hours, where children were asking us questions, parents were asking us questions, and just so grateful that we were there and speaking the language and being able just to inform them of the day-to-day. Most of the stories that we received were they put us on a bus, they sent us to a hotel, and then sent us here. And since then, no one has explained exactly what next steps are and what it is that's happening. They were so grateful to hear that they now had a safe place to stay, that they had a support system, and that we would do everything and anything to assist them as much as we could. The challenges then came in being able to provide food, the culture shock with our food and their food, what that looked like, educating ourselves around what were some of the things that they were going to need, anything from medication to protein, to the refrigerators in order to hold the protein, which we had never done. We received these buckets, which happened to be in my office today, full of like emergency food, oatmeal, granola bars, because it was an instant thing for us to receive anything and everything that we could. The families expressed to us how grateful they were, but also the traumatic experiences that they experienced and what that looked like. To say that we all jumped to action is minimal. We had even maintenance staff translating all over the buildings in order to assist us in being able to speak to our families and see what was needed. We then hit September and school started. And we realized that weather-wise, while us New Yorkers were still enjoying some springtime weather or the end of summer weather, what we call fall, for them, it was winter. And a lot of our children were cold going to school already. And needless to say that when we spoke to the families, we said, you know, winter's coming and it's very much different than what we're seeing now. And they were telling us how they're already so cold walking to school. And so we jumped to action again, of course, asking Victoria's Secret, amongst other people, for donations. And we were able to supply with sweatsuits, with coats, but we also need to realize so many things. We want to make sure that our kids are not bullied in school and that they're not wearing the same outfit. And so we need to think of all those things. We ran to collect sizes from everyone, information about what they needed, everything from diapers, formulas, shoes, and so that they could be able to transition to school. The more we thought about it, the more we thought of things that they would need and were embarrassed or shy to ask for. But we know that starting from scratch, we needed to get everything. And so we were continuing to work on that. Our committee meeting Tuesdays and Thursdays, similar to what we did for COVID, in different departments being able to issue what assistance they can and could have. And so we identified that one of the biggest needs was the language barrier. And we were able to identify outside translators and create an orientation for them as to what it would look like to have these conversations and to assist our case managers in doing so. And so we created a system where we are able to log in and volunteers put in their hours, and we're able to translate different situations and different questions that they might ask in order to do an informed intake. And so we were able to train these translators, over 45, 50 translators, and now have assistance in doing so. However, we still fall short of that because so many families after that came in and continue to come in. Yesterday, by coincidence, some of our program directors were here, and I was able to sit down and ask what is needed. And they told us, we need more coats, Diana, they're so cold. We were able to give out children coats. We were able to give out some coats to our parents, but we still need more because families are coming in every single day. On average, if 6 units open up because we moved families out or they were transitioned out, at least 4 to 5 are families that are coming in as migrant families on average. Our program directors were telling us, which is a huge percentage of our clients. And so every time a new family comes in, we start new and we put in what we can. We try to give them as much as we can as soon as they walk in the door, but families are coming in, more families are coming in, and what we're being told that the majority are going to be migrant families. And so we need as much assistance as possible in order to create and to continue to support our families. As you know, New York City weather gets only worse, January and February. And so if people were cold in September, we can only imagine what happens now. And that culture shock and that need for assistance, I think, is one of our biggest things for now. We realize that food is ongoing and we don't know when we will be receiving assistance from the city. And so providing 3 to 4 meals a day for each individual is consistently something that we're looking to do and assist with as much we can as we continue to navigate what the system is going to do for them. And finally, what we saw the most, I think, Tammy, in your part of the story, I'm sure you'll jump in, is legal support, not having the legal support, not understanding what next steps are, and us not being able to answer those questions because us too, we would need guidance. There are questions around what are next steps, what is the paperwork that we need to see. While our case managers have provided as much individual and group supports around this, this continues to be a challenge for us because legal services is what they'll need. And as time continues to run, they're running out of time in order to make that target of being able to apply for asylum. And so a lot of them, many of them are afraid that they won't be able to do so because they don't have the information. And so one of the biggest, or some of the biggest questions were around legal support and us being able to find assistance in being able to answer that and bring information into the shelters. I think our experience in seeing how communities are built were, for myself and Ms. Tammy, running around in the shelters were eye-opening, and how resilient these families are and how much we are able as New Yorkers and even our other families to take care of each other. I think one of the nicest things I've seen right in my 15 years in shelter was on my tour of giving them a tour of what the building looked like and orientation. We were able to see a few boxes outside of the building or next to the building where there was clothing. Other shelter families had put out clothing for our families that came in from asylum, our asylum families. And we saw them looking and getting stuff from each other. And someone asked me, Diana, are we gonna allow that? We don't give used clothing to our families. And I said, yes, because what that is a community and they're taking care of each other. And those are things that we're able to promote and to say, you know what, here in New York, no matter who it is, we'll take care of you. And so that's kind of the message that we've tried to entail in all of our stories and when we go to the buildings. But to say that this is a challenge and it's a challenge that we didn't expect, falls short. And so I will now pass on to Ms. Tammy, who has been working with most of our families and a lot of our children in providing programs and other things and entertainment as much as we can for our families.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming on today. As introduced as Ms. Tammy, the educator in me can't help but share some really poignant stories and experience that our children have gone through and shared with us. And I think one of the things that make it very interesting is that when a child is able to share a story, especially a traumatic story, it's because they feel safe. And I think that that's one of the points that we've provided to our clients that have come in. As an organization, we always pivot and evolve with the population that we serve. Specifically, a 9-year-old child who, when the parents were arriving in from the city's hub path, typically families are questioned and allowed to be interviewed and explain their circumstances. Because of this wave and the knowing for when families were coming and their circumstance, many families were immediately placed into vacancies at shelters. And I sat in one of the follow-up conversations that were had. And I was actually very shocked because the families had to relive and retell a story of how they commuted and what their journey was like, where they stopped from country to country, and then asked where they slept and what were the addresses. But when you see a 9-year-old jump into the conversation and remind that they moms slept in the streets while the children were given safe places to sleep with the little bit of money that the parents had throughout their journey, and paid, circumstances to get their children to be in safe spaces. That really is an opening moment for you to figure out how strenuous this was for children. We also spoke about the first day of school. And although this year was actually a pretty smooth year, knowing that we had a very large group of new children coming into school systems that they may have not had experienced before. We've had second grade children going to schools for the first time and having never experienced sitting in classrooms before, and having been giving homework help to support them and to help them with academic. Those stresses that both the children and the parents have were circumstances that we had to explain, and part of that culture change that Diana recently mentioned. If I could just take a moment, and I know that the conversation was really pressed by the first two presenters, but winter is an opportunity where we celebrate a change of season and we look forward to some brisk fresh air and snow. But this has been really an opportunity for our children, these asylum seeking children that have coming into environments where there's a real fear about what the change of season is. Even conversations that we had to introduce in our childcare programs and our after school programs of what's daylight savings time. How is it that at 4 o'clock when you exit school or an after school program, it's really dark outside? And many of these children were actually moving through the deserts and traveling in this journey at night, where it causes a lot of fear when all of a sudden, your day begins at 4 o'clock and you're actually out in the dark in the city of New York. But we spoke about resilience, and I also want to emphasize on that. These children have really demonstrated to us the resiliency that we as New Yorkers should have and how we can continue to support them. One of our intentions have always been to be trauma informed. I think from the very beginning, because we had already been trained so strongly in that element and that practice, the maintenance individuals that just on their own took it upon themselves to be those translators and to support children and welcome them in through the doors. That really talks about being trauma informed. But, making sure that in these orientations, they were intentionally designed to be trauma informed, because we knew the exposure that these families had had, and we knew that there was going to be many triggers. One of the experience also that we recall is the mother who put her child for the first time on a school bus. And the school route was actually very lengthy. And when the mother realized that the child did not arrive from school 40 minutes after school finished, the fear and panic that she felt, the concern and that attachment of just not knowing if her child had been taken somewhere else and removed from her custody. Those are circumstances that we're dealing with and having to converse on a regular basis. But you know what? We've had some really exciting opportunities. We've had opportunities where we've invited our children to explore ways of creative learning where it's developmentally appropriate for everyone. And speaking about community, where there's no need to break people into ages, but that we all have things in common. And that's where our childcare and recreation programs come in. Our children have been able to explore STEM activities. How does a paper clip float on water? And educators in the classroom have been able to use devices like Google Translate in the very beginning until they build those relationships. But the fact that children trusted that those educators were doing something intentional to help them understand and be a part of a program, they really built their own network. And they really built a sense of trust, which is really important in this circumstance. I think one of the things that we really want to work on is building secure attachments with our children so that they know that when their parents leave the environment and leave them under our staff care, that the parent is coming back. And those feelings of and comments of detention centers are no longer a circumstance. They're really allowed to be children. I had the pleasure of escorting about 30 families, 100 individuals to the Big Apple Circus. Oh, what an event that was. I mean, everyone's always excited to see the big tent, But just the commute itself, when we were crossing the bridge and they were able to see the New York City lights, and the fact that they arrived to Lincoln Center and they were able to really engage in a New York City landmark and embraced by something that just brought them laughter and brought them together, was really an opportunity to know that we're heading the right direction. And that all comes about with generous support from individuals that are on this call. I think it really makes our programs that much special. You know, these families, the way the composition of the families are very unique. I'm actually often shocked about how it could be a very diverse generational, from a grandmother and the head of household, the adult children, how they all have come together in this group to really support each other. So the needs are very diverse. We're not just focusing on the children, but we also have to focus on facts that there is a medley of individuals involved coming into our buildings. You know, I also want to speak on just the anxiety of the unknown that these individuals had to face. The not knowing when their next court appointment was going to be, and if they weren't going to check in on time with the devices that they were given, if their court dates were missed, and what would happen to their children or to themselves. So one of the things that we really had to escalate is referrals, and utilizing all the networks and all our multidisciplinary departments within our organization to make sure that we knew how to refer our families for mental health, for health services. We had a young family with a 1-year-old. Mom was 21, dad was 23, and they had a 1-year-old. And although we were trying to collect the information of what their needs were, as Diana mentioned, what clothing they needed, little did we know that this child had gone through dehydration during that journey, and what they really needed was Pedialyte and over-the-counter supplies and health services. So we've had to ramp up our referral base to make sure that we can refer clients and know that there's actually benefits and opportunities for them. And one of the things which Chris Mann will probably speak about was also the support that we had to pivot in regards to understanding legal support with navigation systems and the navigation resource centers. I think it really gave us an opportunity to really get engulfed in what was happening, how we can support our families. And that came from every unit, from our income building staff that were having individuals that wanted to come in to be employed because they needed money to come in. So I think with all that said, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today, and I'm going to pass the baton now to Chris Mann. I'm sure he has plenty of great stuff to share.
Thanks so much, Tammy. And I'm going to keep it really short so that we can get to Q&A with Chris at the end. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. So like I said, I'll make it relatively brief. You heard from our program staff the incredible job that they've been doing every day to make sure that we're meeting the needs of these families. On our team, so me and Henry have really been focusing on how can we support these families and our staff from a policy and advocacy perspective. So one of the major needs is obviously housing, right? So shelter's an incredibly important safety net, but for all of these families, what they really need is a permanent place to live. So we've been focused on trying to expand voucher access, right? So both at the city level through city FEPs and trying to make that available to people regardless of immigration status, but also the housing access voucher program at the state level. We're trying to push that over the finish line this year. And then on the capacity side, right? So shelters are now, facing a huge capacity crisis because of all of the migrants that have arrived. And so there's a rule on the books called the 90-day rule that requires families to live in shelter for 90 days before they can even apply for housing assistance, right? And we see that rule as just nonsensical, and it's really delaying, how long it takes for families to get access to housing assistance, which is what they need to move out of shelter. So we've been pushing the mayor to eliminate the 90-day rule. We have a ton of support. We have a ton of groups that are pushing for that. We have a campaign that we've been pushing. You'll get a link to that after this briefing. So we would encourage you to sign on to that and send a letter to the mayor, encouraging him to eliminate the 90-day rule. And then beyond just our city and state advocacy, we've been meeting with members of the New York delegation to try and expand SNAP access, work authorization, right? So like families that are here need to be able to support themselves. And right now, because of the legal limbo that they're in, they often don't have access to certain benefits, don't have access to vouchers. And so that's one of the big pushes, talking to the New York delegation about those pieces and extending temporary protected status. We've also been working with legal groups to make sure that we understand the process and that the families are getting access to legal support that they need. We're still far away from everyone having the legal support that they need, but our legal partners have been amazing in helping us get trained on those things. And then also just finally advocating for additional mental health services, right? We've been pushing for this before the crisis, obviously, but now the need is even greater. And we've been working closely with Council Member Eric Botcher. We helped to draft and introduce a bill in conjunction with him, Intro 522, that would bring mental health services on site at every family shelter in New York City. And we have a ton of support for that right now, currently 38 sponsors in the city council. So a lot of momentum there. And as we said, the need is so high. You heard about the immense trauma that these families have faced. And so we have a lot of momentum, and we're really optimistic that we'll see some systems level change in many of these areas in the near future. And I'll wrap it up there and turn it to Chris for Q&A. Thanks so much.
Pardon me. Thank you. I'm sorry, I have a laryngitis, so if I sound like a frog, take sympathy on me and win more money. Anyway, so we have some great questions already, and I'm going to kind of go through them quickly, but please, put in the Q&A follow-ups or whatever. So the first question was on the Department of Education and how do we work with them? How are we working with them? And you can imagine, given my history in city council, I don't often say the Department of Education did a great job. The Department of Education did a great job on day one for the migrant families. I thought, honestly, by no fault of DOE's, that it might be a disaster. Children had classrooms, children had assignments, they were met by supportive staff, they were put in English language learner classes, really top notch. Now, some challenges have developed, like children were put in the class based on their age, not necessarily based on where they were academically. They come from a different school system, et cetera. So we actually have a meeting on Monday with the chancellor and his staff to review where we are at, because we have the most asylum-seeking families, and put changes into place. So I really can't say enough good things there. There was a question on how long do families usually stay at WIN? The average length of stay is 10 months. You can stay as long as you need. No one gets kicked out, but the average length of stay at the moment is 10 months, which is down from a high of 15 months during the peak of the pandemic. Someone asked how many families come in a week. That depends on how many rooms we have vacant. Right now, we always keep our vacancy rate below 2%. Why would we have any vacant? When somebody leaves, we need to clean, we need to paint, we need to do the floor. But if for some reason we moved a whole bunch of people out one week into permanent housing, more people might come in. If asylum seekers want to go to another state where they have family, we facilitate that. We get them bus tickets. We can't really get them plane tickets because of ID issues, but train or bus tickets to do that. We did have one woman so traumatic. Her paperwork said that not long after she got to New York, she had to go back to Texas to have a social service appointment. She didn't realize, never having been part of a social service network, she should flag that. So she called us from Texas. So we did what we had to do, because that's what we do at WIN. And we bought her a $900 or $1,000 bus ticket to come back so she could, really get going. We now tell everybody, day one, put your address as the homeless shelter, and then nothing like that will happen. Somebody asked, how do you find refugees, migrants housing? It's very hard, as it is hard with other undocumented New Yorkers. Chris Mann mentioned the housing vouchers. They're called FHEPS, FHEPS, which stands for something, but I don't remember. And they're really critical. They'll pay 70% of your rent. If you find an apartment, you pay the other 30. Wynn has done some amazing advocacy on these, but I won't digress at the moment. But you have to be documented to qualify for these vouchers. You have to be documented to go into the city housing authority. We are pushing right now to have the city create a voucher with, basically, to shorthand it, just city funds. And we don't have to put that requirement on it. It's the federal money that has that requirement. That's something we were working on before before Donald Trump became president. And then the Immigrant Coalition said, let's put that on hold. We're now back working on it. Somebody asked who some of our partners are. We have great partners on food. We work with the food bank, New York City Food Bank, with City Harvest. We also work with all of the local food banks and pantries near our shelters. One of the challenges has been that for the food bank and for City Harvest, they tend to deliver in large amounts that need a refrigeration system and freezer system that we, even with the 5 new refrigerators, don't have, but they really try to work with us. I want to say the libraries are great partners for all of us. For legal, we work closely with Legal Aid. We work close with Make the Road on immigrant legal issues. Mental health, we have great partners in Bright Point and the Floating Hospital, but they are stretched. We recently called the Floating Hospital for a client. It was a 3.5-month wait for an intake. That's why, and this would so benefit the migrant families, but everybody, pushing for legislation that would fund on-site mental health at family shelters. Can Chris Mann repeat the bill number he mentioned that about mental health? I don't know the bill number.
Yeah, it's intro 522. I dropped a link into the chat, but I'm not sure if I can drop it into the Q&A.
Okay. So for New York, so the city of New York is one of the few jurisdictions in the country, and the first, where housing is a right. So we have to house everyone who is homeless every night. When that first happened in the late 80s, early 90s, the city tried to do it themselves, and it was a disaster. So that's why groups like Wynn are in existence, and Help USA and others. The city contracts out homelessness. So we do get NYC resources, so to speak, in our contracts, but those are basically for, heat and hot water and lighting. We really work in coalition with other New York City entities to get food and to get the support and resources we need. So for example, we have an income building program where we pay staff, but we have volunteer groups who do mentoring, do financial literacy, things like that. So that's an area where we're able to provide services without city costs. And we are always pushing for the city and state to give more resources where it's needed. So thank you for that question, Mary. And Leslie, what's the best link to share on social media for friends? So we are Win NYC, which is 2 N's, Win NYC, and that would be great. We do have a coat and boot drive going on. We take only new items, and Leslie, I will have somebody follow up with everybody on who on the staff you could follow up with, if you could maybe do that, at your office or through your church or mosque or synagogue, or, maybe in the building that you live in, if it's a big building. Jennifer asked if this is being recorded, and I don't know the answer to that. So I should, but that's a technological, Henry says it is. Any other questions? I went a little fast on that. You know, to Mary's question, oh, Diana just let me know that Sun River is another great mental health provider. And also we will send you after this our list, our Amazon shopping list, which is a great way if, you know, if the drive is too much or whatever, or just doesn't work where you live or work or worship, that's a great way to help us with resources. You know, and Mary's question about where do we go beyond government resources and in government resources really, I think, speaks a lot to the presentation that was made. Wynn knows that the only way we are going to break the cycle of homelessness in an intergenerational way, because the leading indicator that you will be a homeless adult is having been a homeless child, is if we all do this together as a city. So if the city funds us, if the state funds us, if foundations fund us, if, you know, religious institutions come and volunteer, if businesses, you know, come and volunteer. We had TJ Maxx come once and do a luau, and I got to go to it. It was great fun, and also that had a STEM component too. We made ice cream in Ziploc bags. That is the way we're going to get this done together. If people go to Amazon links, if people make donations. So I just want to thank all of you for being part of that community. And you heard it when Diana talked about community with the boxes of clothes. Think of it, Wynn's staff have created a place with our clients where a homeless woman and her friends can see abundance, can see more than they need in their closet, and they can give to someone else. Tammy said, you tell a story when you feel safe. Because of your support and donations, we have a security staff that is trauma-informed care. They are not your typical security staff. So I just want to thank you all for that so much. It's just a remarkable and critical amount of work. I want to let you know that we'll be emailing you the ways to engage. They're also in the chat, but we will email them to you. And I just want to thank everyone of the staff who participated today. Thank you all again for your generosity. Know that you could be getting a call from me soon for year-end donations. So take it, please take it, because I'm speaking to you on behalf of the 5,000 people who slept with us last night at a Wynn facility, on behalf of our children. And there are more children in shelter than there are seats in the Barclays Arena. And we can end that together. So I leave you with that thought, and I wish you and your family a happy, healthy, and safe holiday season, and hope to see you all soon.